The morning fog hung low over Chicago's skyline as Peter Matthews stood at his apartment window for the last time. 28 years old, with dark hair that caught the light just right and eyes that held secrets he wasn't ready to share, Peter had made a decision that would change everything. The suitcase by his feet contained his entire life, or at least, the life he was willing to take with him. His fingers traced the edge of his passport, worn from previous travels that no one in Chicago knew about. The official stamp pages told stories of business trips that weren't quite what they seemed. Peter's profession remained a mystery even to his closest friends, hidden behind vague explanations of consulting work and international projects. But today, he was leaving that shadowy world behind, or so he told himself. The Uber notification chimed on his phone. Time to go. As the car pulled away from the familiar streets of Lincoln Park, Peter watched his old life disappear in the rearview mirror. The driver, a chatty man named Jose, tried to make conversation about his destination. Madrid? Huh? Beautiful city. You visiting family? Peter's jaw tightened slightly. Family. That was complicated. His parents had stopped asking questions about his work years ago, accepting the mysterious nature of his frequent absences with resigned disappointment. His sister Emily knew something was different about her brother, but she'd learned not to pry. The goodbye dinner 3 nights ago had been awkward, filled with unspoken concerns and careful words. Starting fresh, Peter replied simply, his Chicago accent still thick despite years of international travel. The memories of his childhood home on the north side flooded back as they passed familiar landmarks. Wrigley Field, where his father had taken him to countless Cubs games. The lakefront where he'd had his first kiss at 16. The coffee shop on Clark Street where he'd spent hours studying business at DePaul University, never imagining his life would take such an unexpected turn. But Chicago held more than just nostalgic memories. It held the weight of decisions he'd rather forget, contracts he wished he'd never signed, and people who still thought they owned pieces of his soul. The consulting firm where he'd supposedly worked for the past 5 years knew better than to ask too many questions about his real activities. The less they knew about Peter's actual clients, the better for everyone involved. At O'Hare International Airport, Peter moved through security with practiced ease. His carry-on contained the essentials: high-end laptop, encrypted hard drives, and documents that would raise eyebrows if anyone knew how to read them properly. But to casual observers, he looked like any other young professional heading overseas for business. The departure gate buzzed with typical airport energy. Families saying tearful goodbyes, business travelers typing frantically on laptops, and the occasional adventurer heading off to unknown destinations. Peter found himself in the latter category, though his adventure was more escape than exploration. As boarding began for Iberia Flight 6275 to Madrid, Peter caught sight of his reflection in the terminal window. The man staring back looked confident, even charming, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. The burner phone in his pocket had been buzzing all morning with messages he had no intention of answering. His old life was calling, but Peter Matthews was officially unavailable. Peter settled into his business class seat, a luxury he could afford thanks to his mysterious profession. The flight attendant, a young Spanish woman named Carmen, offered him champagne with a smile that lingered just a moment longer than professional courtesy required. Even in his conflicted state, Peter's natural magnetism was evident. "First time to Madrid?" Carmen asked in accented English, clearly drawn to the handsome American with the intense gaze. "Yes, but hopefully not the last," Peter replied, his charm automatic despite his inner turmoil. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Peter's mind drifted back to the events that had led to this moment. 3 months ago, everything had changed. A job in Prague that went sideways. Questions from people he'd trusted. The realization that his carefully constructed double life was beginning to crumble. The consulting firm had been the perfect cover. Matthews and Associates specialized in international risk assessment, which could mean anything and nothing. His official clients were multinational corporations seeking market analysis in emerging economies. His unofficial clients operated in much grayer areas of international commerce. Peter had justified it for years. The information he gathered and sold wasn't technically illegal, just highly sensitive. Corporate espionage lived in a moral gray zone that he'd learned to navigate with practiced ease. He told himself he was just a very well-paid researcher, connecting dots that others couldn't or wouldn't connect. But Prague had shown him the real consequences of his work. Seeing the faces of people whose lives had been disrupted by information he'd provided had shattered his carefully maintained emotional distance. The family-owned factory that had been forced to close. The small investors who'd lost everything when their company's secrets were exposed to competitors. Peter realized he'd become something he never intended to be. The plane lifted off from Chicago, and Peter watched his city shrink below him. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly to the east, and for a moment, he felt like he was leaving everything that defined him behind. Which, he supposed, was exactly the point. His phone buzzed one last time before airplane mode. A text from an unknown number. "Running won't solve anything, Matthews. We know where you're going." Peter deleted the message and powered down his phone. Whatever games his former associates wanted to play, they'd have to play them without him. The flight to Madrid would take 8 hours. 8 hours to transform from Peter the information broker to Peter the digital nomad. He'd been preparing for this transition for months, setting up legitimate freelance clients, building a portfolio of actual consulting work that had nothing to do with corporate secrets or gray market intelligence. Sitting beside him was Eduardo Ramirez, a Madrid-based wine importer who struck up a conversation during the meal service. Eduardo was returning from a business trip to Chicago, and his enthusiasm for his home city was infectious. "Madrid is not like Barcelona," Eduardo explained, gesturing with his wine glass. "Barcelona is beautiful, but it shows off. Madrid keeps its secrets hidden until you earn them. The Real Madrid is in the small bars in Malasana, in the late-night conversations in Retiro Park, in the way the city comes alive after midnight." Peter found himself genuinely interested. His previous travels had always been focused on work, on targets and objectives. The idea of discovering a city for pure enjoyment felt foreign but appealing. "And the women," Eduardo continued with a conspiratorial smile. "Spanish women are not impressed by money or fancy cars. They want to know your soul. They want passion, authenticity. You cannot fake your way into a Spanish woman's heart." The comment hit Peter unexpectedly. When was the last time anyone had seen his authentic self? Years of constructing personas and playing roles had left him unsure of who he really was underneath it all. Eduardo pulled out his phone and showed Peter photos of Madrid's neighborhoods. "Where will you stay?" "Malasana," Peter replied, remembering his Airbnb booking. "Near the Plaza del Dos de Mayo." Eduardo's eyes lit up. "Ah, perfect choice. The heart of old Madrid. But be careful, that neighborhood has a way of capturing souls. Many people go there for a few weeks and never leave." As the conversation continued, Peter found himself sharing more than he intended. Not the dangerous truths about his past, but genuine thoughts about wanting to change his life, about feeling disconnected from himself, about the desire to discover who he could be without the weight of his mistakes. "You sound like a man running from something," Eduardo observed perceptively. Peter's smile faltered slightly. "Maybe running toward something instead." "In my experience," Eduardo said, raising his glass in a small toast, "the best journeys involve a little of both." The rest of the flight passed with Peter alternating between sleep and anxious anticipation. His dreams were filled with fragments of his Chicago life, late nights in anonymous office buildings, encrypted communications, the faces of people whose trust he'd betrayed. But they were also filled with images of Madrid streets he'd never seen, of possibilities he'd never allowed himself to imagine. What do you think about Peter's journey so far? Are you curious about what secrets he's hiding and what awaits him in Madrid? Let us know in the comments what you think Peter's real profession might be. The plane began its descent toward Madrid-Barajas Airport as the Spanish countryside spread out below them. Rolling hills dotted with olive groves gave way to the sprawling urban landscape of one of Europe's great capital cities. Peter's heart rate increased as reality set in. He was actually doing this. Eduardo helped him with recommendations for his first days in the city. "Start with the basics," he advised. "Walk through El Retiro Park at sunset. Try Jamón Ibérico at Mercado de San Miguel. And whatever you do, don't eat dinner before 10 o'clock. The locals will think you're a tourist. As they prepared for landing, Eduardo handed Peter his business card. If you need anything, or if Madrid begins to overwhelm you, call me. The city can be intense for newcomers. Peter pocketed the card gratefully. It had been years since someone had offered him help without expecting something in return. Madrid-Barajas Airport buzzed with typical international airport energy. But Peter felt every sensation with heightened awareness. The sound of rapid Spanish conversations, the smell of strong coffee, the organized chaos of arrival procedures. It all felt like stepping into a new world. Immigration was routine, though Peter noticed the officer studying his passport with professional interest. His travel history raised questions he hoped wouldn't be asked. Fortunately, American business travelers were common enough not to warrant additional scrutiny. Collecting his luggage from baggage claim, Peter's mind was focused on the logistics of his new life. Taxi to the apartment, get settled, find a local phone plan, locate the nearest grocery store. Simple tasks that felt momentous given their context. That's when he saw her. She was standing near the international arrivals exit, not waiting for anyone specific but scanning the crowd with purpose. Latina features, long dark hair, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her stand out from everyone around her. But it wasn't her beauty that caught Peter's attention. It was the way she looked directly at him. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal, and Peter felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine surprise. Her gaze wasn't casual or coincidental. She was looking for him specifically, though he was certain they'd never met. The woman's expression shifted slightly when she confirmed his identity. Not shock, but satisfaction, as if a puzzle piece had fallen into place. She didn't approach him, didn't wave or gesture. She simply watched him with dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Peter found himself frozen, luggage cart forgotten, trying to process this unexpected development. Was she connected to his past? Someone sent by his former associates to track his movements? Or was this something else entirely? But before he could decide how to react, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd with practiced ease. Peter tried to follow, abandoning his luggage cart and pushing through the mass of travelers. But she was gone as if she'd never been there at all. Standing alone in the middle of the terminal, Peter questioned whether he'd imagined the entire encounter. The stress of leaving Chicago, the anxiety about starting over, the guilt about his past, maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew what he'd seen. Someone had been waiting for him in Madrid. Someone who knew he was coming. The question was whether she represented his past catching up with him or his future calling him forward. The taxi ride from the airport into central Madrid gave Peter his first real taste of his new city. The driver, Miguel, was a weathered man in his 50s who spoke broken English mixed with rapid Spanish, most of which Peter couldn't follow despite his college language courses. "Primera vez en Madrid?" Miguel asked, catching Peter's eye in the rearview mirror. "Sí, primera vez," Peter replied, exhausting most of his Spanish vocabulary in 3 words. Miguel laughed and launched into what Peter assumed was a tourist's guide to the city, pointing out landmarks and explaining their significance in passionate Spanish. Though he understood perhaps every 10th word, Peter found Miguel's enthusiasm infectious. This felt different from the anonymous business trips of his past, more personal, more real. The architecture amazed him as they drove through different neighborhoods. Unlike Chicago's grid system and towering skyscrapers, Madrid felt organic, grown rather than planned. Buildings from different centuries stood side by side, creating a visual history lesson. The afternoon light cast everything in warm golden tones that made even mundane street scenes look like paintings. "Malasana," Miguel announced as they entered Peter's new neighborhood. Muy bohemio, muy artistico. The streets were narrow compared to Chicago's broad avenues, lined with small bars, vintage shops, and apartment buildings with wrought iron balconies. Young people sat on stoops and gathered in small plazas, speaking in animated Spanish that sounded like music to Peter's ears. The contrast with his sterile Chicago apartment was striking. There, everything had been chosen for function and anonymity. Expensive furniture that looked like a hotel, art selected by a decorator. a space that revealed nothing about its occupant's personality. Here, even from the taxi window, he could see life bursting from every balcony garden, every hand-painted sign, every group of friends sharing drinks on the sidewalk. Miguel pulled up to a narrow building on a side street off Plaza del Dos de Mayo. "A key," he announced, turning to help with Peter's luggage. The building was old but well-maintained, with a heavy wooden door and a small brass nameplate that read Edificio San Andres, Peter's temporary home for the next month, according to his Airbnb reservation. As Miguel drove away with a cheerful "Bienvenido a Madrid," Peter stood alone on the narrow sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of a neighborhood coming alive for the evening. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing guitar. The smell of garlic and olive oil drifted from open windows. Children's laughter echoed from the small plaza around the corner. For the first time in months, Peter smiled without forcing it. The apartment building's entrance was typically European, a small foyer with mailboxes and a narrow staircase leading to the upper floors. Peter's temporary home was on the third floor, apartment 3B, according to the key instructions his Airbnb host had sent. The stairs creaked with age but felt solid beneath his feet. Each landing had a small window that looked out onto an interior courtyard where laundry hung from lines and potted plants created a small urban jungle. The building felt lived in, full of history and stories, so different from the sterile efficiency of his Chicago high-rise. Apartment 3B was small but perfectly appointed. High ceilings with exposed wooden beams, tile floors worn smooth by decades of use, and tall windows that opened onto a narrow balcony overlooking the street below. The furniture was eclectic, a mix of antique pieces and modern necessities that somehow worked together perfectly. Peter set down his luggage and walked to the balcony, pushing open the tall windows. The evening air was warm and carried the sounds of Madrid settling into night. Below, the narrow street buzzed with activity as locals emerged for their evening routines. He could see into the small bars and restaurants, watching people gather around tiny tables, gesturing expressively as they talked. This was exactly what he'd hoped for: authentic immersion in local life, rather than the isolated hotel rooms of his business travels. Here, he could disappear into the rhythm of a real neighborhood, become just another face in the crowd rather than a target to be tracked. But as he unpacked his belongings, Peter discovered something that made his blood run cold. Inside the antique wardrobe, hanging behind several old winter coats, was a manila envelope with his name written on it in neat handwriting. "Peter Matthews, welcome to Madrid." His hands shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph, the woman from the airport, sitting at a cafe table with the Madrid skyline visible in the background. On the back, someone had written, "Café Central, Thursday, 8 p.m. Come alone." Thursday was tomorrow. Peter sat heavily on the bed, his mind racing. Either this was an elaborate coincidence, or his attempt to disappear had failed before it even began. The envelope looked old, as if it had been waiting for him for weeks or months. But that was impossible. He'd only booked this apartment 2 weeks ago, using a credit card under his legal name. Unless someone had been tracking his movements longer than he'd realized. The mysterious woman's face haunted him. She'd been beautiful, yes, but there was something else in her expression. Not malice, but knowledge. She knew things about him that he wasn't sure he knew about himself. Peter walked back to the balcony, looking down at the street with new awareness. Was someone watching him now? Were his former associates already closing in? Or was this something else entirely? As if summoned by his paranoid thoughts, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown Spanish number. "Madrid suits you better than Chicago ever did. Sweet dreams, Peter." He powered off his phone immediately, but the damage was done. Whatever game was being played, he was already several moves behind. Outside his window, Madrid continued its ancient rhythm, unaware that a young American's carefully planned escape had just become something much more complicated. The guitar music continued from a nearby balcony, mixing with laughter and conversation to create the soundtrack of his new life. A life that was already proving to be far more mysterious than he'd bargained for. As Peter tried to process this unexpected development, one thing became clear. Leaving Chicago hadn't freed him from his past. If anything, It had led him directly into a future that promised to be just as complicated, just as dangerous, and infinitely more intriguing than anything he'd left behind. The woman from the airport held the key to understanding what was happening to him. Tomorrow evening at Café Central, he would begin to learn whether she represented salvation or destruction. But tonight, in his small apartment overlooking the narrow streets of Malasana, Peter Matthews allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in years: the electric anticipation of the unknown. Thank you so much for staying with us this far. We know Peter's story is just beginning, and the best is definitely yet to come. Who do you think this mysterious woman is? What secrets is she hiding about Peter's past? And what will happen at their meeting tomorrow night? Madrid has already begun to weave its spell around our protagonist, but as Eduardo warned him on the plane, this city has a way of capturing souls. Will Peter find the fresh start he's looking for? Or has he walked directly into a trap more sophisticated than anything he faced in Chicago? Don't miss the next episode where Peter will venture into Madrid's local markets searching for answers, only to discover a mysterious box that will change everything. And what happens when the woman from the airport suddenly vanishes without a trace? The red veil she leaves behind will unlock secrets Peter never imagined possible. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of Peter's incredible journey. Leave us a comment telling us what you think will happen next. We love hearing your theories and predictions. The streets of Madrid are calling, and Peter Matthews is about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous journey is the one toward the truth about yourself. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Peter's Malasana apartment, casting long shadows across the worn tile floors. He had barely slept, his mind consumed by the mysterious envelope and the cryptic message about meeting at Café Central. Thursday had arrived, but something felt different about Madrid this morning. The city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Peter dressed carefully, choosing a simple black shirt and dark jeans. If this meeting was connected to his past life in Chicago, he wanted to project confidence while remaining inconspicuous. The encrypted hard drives in his luggage seemed to weigh heavier on his conscience as he prepared for what could be a confrontation with his former world. At precisely 8 p.m., Peter arrived at Café Central, one of Madrid's most iconic establishments in the Huertas neighborhood. The café buzzed with its usual evening crowd, intellectuals discussing literature over cortados, couples sharing intimate conversations, and tourists soaking in the authentic Spanish atmosphere. The ornate interior, with its marble columns and vintage mirrors, created the perfect backdrop for clandestine meetings. But she wasn't there. Peter ordered a café con leche and positioned himself at a corner table with clear views of both entrances. He waited and waited. Other patrons came and went. The evening crowd gradually thinned, but the mysterious woman never appeared. By 10 p.m., it became clear that whatever game was being played, this wasn't part of it. Frustrated and confused, Peter walked back through Madrid's narrow streets toward Malasana. The photograph in the envelope had shown her clearly at this very cafe. Why arrange a meeting she had no intention of keeping? Unless, he realized with growing unease, the meeting had never been about a face-to-face encounter at all. Peter woke the next morning with a new determination. If the woman wouldn't come to him, he would find her himself. Madrid was large, but the expatriate and digital nomad community was relatively small. Someone, somewhere, would know something about a mysterious woman who seemed to know more about Peter Matthews than she should. His first stop would be the local markets, places where locals gathered, where information flowed as freely as morning coffee, and where a newcomer asking the right questions might learn the wrong answers. The Mercado de San Ildefonso in Malasana was already bustling when Peter arrived at 9 a.m. The converted market hall buzzed with activity as vendors set up their stalls selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. The aroma of fresh bread mixed with strong Spanish coffee and the chatter of vendors calling out their morning specials. Peter bought a cortadou from a small stand and began wandering through the market, observing the rhythms of local life. Elderly women examined tomatoes with the expertise of lifelong cooks. Young professionals grabbed quick breakfasts before heading to offices. Artists and students lingered over coffee, discussing projects and dreams. It felt authentic in a way that his sterile Chicago existence never had. Here, commerce was personal, relationships mattered, and everyone seemed to know their neighbors. Peter found himself envying the easy camaraderie he witnessed between vendors and regular customers. At a stall selling vintage books and curiosities, he paused to examine a collection of old Madrid guidebooks. The vendor, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes, looked up from arranging a display of antique jewelry. "You're American," she observed in accented English, not asking but stating a fact. "Yes, just arrived this week," Peter replied, surprised by her directness. "And you're looking for someone?" she continued, her gaze studying his face with unsettling perception. Peter's pulse quickened. "What makes you say that?" The woman smiled mysteriously. "Americans who come to neighborhood markets instead of tourist attractions are usually running from something or searching for someone. You have the look of a searcher." Before Peter could respond, she reached under her counter and produced a small wooden box, ornately carved with symbols he didn't recognize. "Elena Castillo," she introduced herself, extending a weathered hand. "And you must be Peter Matthews." The sound of his name sent a chill down Peter's spine. "How do you?" "She said you would come," Elena interrupted, placing the wooden box on the counter between them. "She said you would have questions that only this could answer." Peter stared at the box, his mind racing. The woman from the airport had been here, had spoken with Elena, had left instructions. How many steps ahead was she in whatever game they were playing? "When did she come?" Peter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago," Elena replied, watching Peter's reaction carefully. "Before you arrived in Madrid. She knew exactly when you would land, where you would stay, and that you would eventually find your way here." The implications were staggering. His movements had been predicted with impossible precision, which meant either his former associates had orchestrated this entire scenario, or something far more complex was unfolding. "What did she look like?" Peter pressed, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Elena's description matched perfectly: long dark hair, distinctive Latin features, an air of mystery that made her unforgettable. But she added details Peter hadn't noticed in their brief airport encounter. "She wore a red veil," Elena said, "like something from another era, and she spoke Spanish with an accent I couldn't place. Not quite Mexican, not quite Argentinian. Something older, more historic." Peter reached for the box, but Elena's hand intercepted his. "She said to tell you that the past and present are not as separate as you believe," Elena continued, "and that your family's history runs deeper through Madrid than you know." "My family?" Peter's confusion was genuine. His grandparents had immigrated to Chicago from Ireland and Poland. There was no Spanish connection in his family history that he knew of. "Open the box at home," Elena advised, releasing his hand. "Alone. And be prepared for your understanding of everything to change." Peter paid for the box, though Elena hadn't named a price. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Peter? She also said to tell you that some secrets are kept not to hide the truth, but to protect it until the right moment arrives." Walking back to his apartment, Peter felt the weight of the small wooden box in his hands. Whatever was inside would either provide answers or deepen the mystery further. But one thing was certain: his anonymous escape to Madrid had become anything but anonymous. What do you think is inside this mysterious box? And how could Peter's family possibly be connected to Madrid's history? Share your theories in the comments. We love hearing what you think will happen next. The streets of Malasana seemed different as Peter walked home. Every face in the crowd could be watching him. Every window could hide observing eyes. The paranoia of his Chicago life was returning, but this felt different, less corporate, more personal, as if the very stones of Madrid held secrets about his identity. Back in his apartment, Peter set the box on his small dining table and stared at it for several minutes before working up the courage to lift the lid. The carved symbols on the surface seemed to shift in the afternoon light streaming through his windows, creating patterns that looked almost like a code. When he finally opened it, Peter's breath caught in his throat. Inside the wooden box lay items that defied explanation. The red veil Elena had mentioned was folded carefully at the bottom, its silk fabric seeming to shimmer with an inner light. Beneath it were several old photographs, their edges yellowed with age. The first photograph showed a man who could have been Peter's twin, standing in front of what appeared to be medieval walls. The clothing suggested the image was taken in the 1940s, but the resemblance was so striking that Peter initially thought he was looking at a doctored modern photo of himself. The second photograph showed the same man with a woman wearing an identical red veil to the one in the box. They stood together in what Peter recognized as Toledo's famous cathedral, their faces serious, almost ceremonial. But it was the third photograph that stopped Peter's heart entirely. It showed his grandfather, definitely his grandfather, whom he'd known as a child before the old man's death when Peter was 12. But here, his grandfather appeared to be the same age as the man in the other photographs, standing with the same mysterious woman in the same red veil. A handwritten note in faded ink was tucked beneath the photographs. The Matthews family has guarded certain truths for 3 generations. The time has come for Peter to understand his inheritance. Peter's hands shook as he examined a fourth item, an antique key with intricate metalwork and strange symbols that matched those carved on the box. A small tag attached to it bore an address in Toledo. The final item was a map of Toledo's old city, with several locations marked in red ink. One marking indicated the cathedral where the photographs had been taken. Another marked what appeared to be a section of the ancient city walls. A third pointed to a building in the Jewish quarter with a notation, Casa de los Secretos, House of Secrets. Peter sat back in his chair, trying to process what he was seeing. His grandfather had never mentioned Spain, never spoken of any connection to Madrid or Toledo. The old man had been a quiet bookkeeper who spent his retirement tending a small garden behind his Chicago bungalow. The idea that he had been involved in some multi-generational conspiracy seemed impossible. But the photographs didn't lie, and the resemblance between Peter and the unknown man was too strong to be coincidental. As evening fell over Madrid, Peter found himself standing on his balcony, looking out over the narrow streets of Malesana with new eyes. How long had his family been connected to this city? What secrets had been passed down through generations? And why was he only learning about it now? His phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown Spanish number as before. Now you begin to understand. Toledo holds the answers you seek. The woman you're looking for will find you when you're ready. This time, Peter didn't turn off his phone. Instead, he typed back, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The response came immediately. "We want nothing from you, Peter Matthews. We want everything for you. Your birthright awaits in Toledo's ancient walls." Despite the cryptic messages and mysterious revelations, Peter wasn't ready to abandon his search for the woman from the airport. If she held the key to understanding his family's connection to Spain, he needed to find her before making any trips to Toledo. The next morning, Peter began a systematic search of Madrid's cafes, markets, and gathering places where expatriates and travelers congregated. He showed Elena's description to baristas, asked subtle questions of other vendors, and searched faces in crowds with growing desperation. At a small cafe near Retiro Park, a young Spanish woman named Carmen remembered seeing someone matching the description. "She came here several times last week," Carmen recalled, refilling Peter's courte-du. "Always alone, always reading old books. She spoke to me in Spanish, but her accent, it was strange, like she learned the language long ago and hadn't used it in years." "Did she say anything about where she was staying?" Peter pressed. Carmen shook her head. "But she always paid with very old coins. Not euros, not even pesetas. Ancient coins that looked like they belonged in a museum." The details sent another chill through Peter, who carried medieval currency in modern Madrid. At the Mercado de San Miguel, a flower vendor claimed to have sold the woman white roses every morning for a week. Always exactly 7 roses. Always at precisely 9 a.m. "She said they were for remembering," the vendor explained. "I asked what she was remembering, and she said promises made to the dead." Each clue made the mystery deeper rather than clearer. The woman seemed to exist at the edges of the normal world, appearing and disappearing like a figure from another time. By afternoon, Peter's search had led him through dozens of establishments across Madrid, but the woman remained elusive. It was as if she had vanished into the city's ancient stones, leaving behind only traces and whispers. Frustrated, Peter returned to Café Central where their failed meeting had been scheduled. The afternoon crowd was different from the evening regulars, more tourists, fewer locals, a different energy entirely. He was about to leave when the bartender, a middle-aged man with knowing eyes, approached him. "You're the American who was here last night," he observed, wiping down glasses with practiced efficiency. "Yes," Peter confirmed. "I was meeting someone who didn't show up." The bartender nodded slowly. "She was here, though, just not when you were." Peter's pulse quickened. "When?" "This morning, around 6 a.m., just after we opened. She sat at the same table you chose last night and left this for you." The bartender handed Peter a sealed envelope with his name written in the same elegant handwriting as the first message. Inside was a single sentence. "Some meetings happen across time rather than in it. Toledo will teach you to see differently." That evening, as Peter sat in his apartment studying the photographs and map from the mysterious box, his phone rang. The caller ID showed no number, just unknown. "Hello, Peter." The voice was female, accented, and somehow familiar despite their never having spoken. "You're her," Peter said, not needing to ask. "I am many things," the voice replied cryptically. "But yes, I am the woman you've been seeking. Why didn't you come to the cafe?" "Because you weren't ready for that conversation yet. But you're beginning to understand now, aren't you? The photographs, the key, the map, they're starting to make sense." Peter looked down at the items spread across his table. "Nothing makes sense. My grandfather never mentioned Spain. My family has no connection to this place." "Your family has the deepest possible connection to this place," the woman corrected. "But certain truths were hidden to protect them. To protect you." "Protect me from what?" There was a long pause before she answered. "From understanding your true purpose before you were ready to fulfill it." "And I'm ready now?" "Toledo will tell us that. The walls there have witnessed your family's story for centuries. They hold memories that photographs and documents cannot capture." Peter felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Will you be in Toledo?" "I will be where I need to be when I need to be there," she replied. "But Peter, be careful who you trust. Not everyone who knows your story wishes you well. Some secrets have powerful guardians who prefer them to remain buried." The line went dead, leaving Peter alone with more questions than answers. That night, Peter packed a small bag for Toledo. The ancient city was only an hour from Madrid by train, but he sensed he was embarking on a much longer journey, one that would take him through decades of family history and perhaps centuries of Spanish secrets. As he prepared for sleep, Peter noticed something that made his blood run cold. The red veil from the box was no longer where he had left it. He searched his apartment frantically, but it was nowhere to be found. All the windows were locked. The door showed no signs of forced entry, yet somehow the veil had vanished. On his pillow, he found a single white rose, one of 7, just like the woman had bought at the market each morning. A note was attached. "Some gifts must be earned. Toledo will test whether you are worthy of your inheritance." Peter lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he would find in Toledo's ancient walls. His escape from Chicago's corporate espionage world had led him not to freedom, but to a mystery that seemed to stretch back through generations of his family. Outside his window, Madrid slept peacefully, unaware that one of its temporary residents was about to discover that some family legacies are written in stone and blood, and that the past never truly dies. It simply waits for the right moment to reclaim its inheritors. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible revelation. Can you believe the connection between Peter's family and Spain goes back generations? What do you think Peter will discover in Toledo's medieval walls? Tomorrow, Peter boards a train to one of Spain's most mysterious cities, where ancient stones hold secrets that will change everything he thought he knew about himself. The woman in the red veil has vanished again, But her promise that Toledo holds the answers suggests Peter's greatest discoveries, and perhaps his greatest dangers, still lie ahead. What do you think Peter's family legacy could be? Medieval treasures? Ancient knowledge? Or something even more mysterious hidden in Toledo's legendary walls? Share your theories in the comments below. Don't miss the next episode where Peter travels to the ancient city of Toledo and begins to uncover secrets that have been hidden for centuries. In Whispers of Toledo's Ancient Walls, our protagonist will explore medieval streets that hold memories of his ancestors and encounter a new traveling companion who may be friend or foe. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of Peter's incredible journey into his own mysterious past. The greatest revelations are still to come, and you won't want to miss what Toledo's ancient walls are about to whisper to our intrepid traveler. The morning train from Madrid's Atocha station cut through the Castilian countryside with rhythmic precision, carrying Peter toward a destiny he was only beginning to understand. The high-speed rail covered the 70 kilometers to Toledo in just 33 minutes. But for Peter, it felt like traveling backward through centuries of hidden family history. In his backpack, carefully wrapped in a hotel towel, lay the mysterious key and the ancient map that had emerged from the wooden box. The photographs of his grandfather and the unknown man who looked exactly like him were tucked safely in his passport holder, close to his heart. Each item seemed to pulse with significance he couldn't yet comprehend. The countryside outside his window was a tapestry of golden fields and distant hills, unchanged for centuries. This was the landscape his ancestors had known, the same earth that had witnessed whatever secrets his family had been guarding for generations. Peter found himself wondering how many times members of the Matthews family had made this same journey, carrying similar burdens of knowledge and responsibility. As the train began its approach to Toledo, the ancient city emerged like something from a medieval fairy tale. Perched on a rocky promontory and encircled by the Tagus River, Toledo's skyline was dominated by the towering spires of its cathedral and the imposing silhouette of the Alcazar fortress. The city's honey-colored walls seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, giving it an almost mystical appearance. Peter had read about Toledo during his sleepless night in Madrid, the city of three cultures, where Christians, Muslims, and Jews had coexisted for centuries, creating a unique blend of architectural styles and cultural traditions. But reading about history and stepping into it were entirely different experiences. The train station sat below the historic city center, connected by a series of escalators that carried passengers up from the modern world into the medieval past. As Peter ascended, each level seemed to take him further back in time, until he emerged into a plaza surrounded by ancient stone buildings that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Toledo's streets were a maze of narrow cobblestone alleys that twisted and turned without apparent logic, following patterns established over 1,000 years ago. Peter consulted his antique map frequently, trying to orient himself in a city where GPS seemed helpless against the weight of history. The map marked several locations, but the closest to the train station was the Jewish quarter, where the Casa de los Secretos was supposedly located. Peter made his way through increasingly narrow streets, passing tiny shops selling Damascene steel and marzipan, traditional crafts that had been perfected in Toledo for centuries. The tourists were mainly concentrated around the major monuments, leaving the residential areas of the old city relatively quiet. Here, Peter could hear his footsteps echoing off ancient walls, could smell the mixture of old stones and Mediterranean herbs that seemed to permeate every corner of the city. As he walked deeper into the Jewish quarter, Peter began to understand why Toledo had been chosen as a hiding place for family secrets. The city was a labyrinth within a labyrinth, where a person could disappear completely just by turning the wrong corner. Every building looked ancient, every doorway could conceal mysteries, and every stone seemed to whisper stories of the past. The address on his map led him to a narrow street called Callejón de los Secretos, literally, the Alley of Secrets. The irony wasn't lost on Peter as he searched for the specific building marked on his grandfather's map. Number 7 was a narrow house wedged between two larger buildings, its facade cracked and weathered by centuries of Spanish sun and winter rains. Unlike its neighbors, which showed signs of recent renovation, this building appeared to have been abandoned for decades. Heavy wooden shutters covered its windows, and iron bars suggested it had once housed something valuable. Peter approached the heavy wooden door and examined the lock. His pulse quickened as he realized it was extraordinarily old, not a modern mechanism, but something that looked like it belonged in a museum. With trembling fingers, he retrieved the antique key from his backpack. The key slid into the lock as if it had been made for it, which Peter realized it probably had been. The mechanism turned with surprising smoothness, and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading upward into darkness. The interior of the abandoned house was a capsule of frozen time. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that followed Peter through the doorway, illuminating a space that felt sacred and secret. The ground floor contained a single room with stone walls and a beamed ceiling, empty except for an ornate wooden chest positioned beneath a narrow window. Peter examined the chest carefully. Like everything else connected to his family mystery, it was old, possibly Renaissance era, decorated with intricate carvings that matched the symbols on the wooden box from Madrid. But unlike the box, this chest was locked with a mechanism that looked far more complex than his simple key could open. Carved into the stone wall above the chest was an inscription in Latin, Veritas in tempore revelator, truth is revealed in time. Below it, someone had scratched additional words in what appeared to be Spanish, though the archaic spelling made them difficult to decipher. Peter photographed everything with his phone, planning to research the inscriptions later. But as he prepared to explore the upper floors, he heard footsteps in the alley outside. His heart raced. Had someone followed him from Madrid? The footsteps paused directly outside the house. Peter pressed himself against the wall beside the door, hardly daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, he heard a voice call out in accented English. "Hello? Is someone in there? I saw the door was open, and this house has been abandoned for years." The voice was male with what sounded like a German accent. Peter remained silent, unsure whether this was coincidence or something more sinister. "Look, I'm a historian," the voice continued. "I study medieval manuscripts, and I've been researching this particular building. If you're exploring it too, perhaps we could help each other." Something in the man's tone suggested genuine scholarly interest rather than threat. Peter made a calculated decision and stepped toward the door. What do you think about this mysterious historian appearing at exactly the right moment? Could this be another coincidence in Peter's journey? Or is something more deliberate happening? Share your thoughts in the comments. "I'm here," Peter called out cautiously, remaining inside the building. "Ah, excellent. My name is Klaus Weber. I'm from the University of Heidelberg. May I come in? I promise I'm not dangerous, just a very curious academic." Peter opened the door wider to reveal a man in his mid-30s with sandy brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who spent more time in libraries than outdoors. He carried a leather satchel and wore an expression of genuine enthusiasm that was difficult to fake. "Klaus Weber," the man repeated, extending his hand. "And you must be the American I've been expecting." Peter's blood ran cold. "Expecting?" Klaus smiled apologetically. "Poor choice of words. I meant hoping to meet. You see, I've been researching the Matthews family history for my doctoral thesis, and when I learned someone fitting your description was asking questions in Madrid." "How did you learn that?" Peter interrupted, his Chicago-honed paranoia returning full force. "Academic networks are smaller than you might think," Klaus replied. "Elena Castillo at the Mercado de San Ildefonso mentioned your visit to a colleague of mine who studies the converso communities of medieval Spain. The connection to this house was, well, it was too interesting to ignore." Klaus gestured toward the ornate chest. "That piece, for instance, is definitely late 15th century, probably commissioned around the time of the Reconquista. The symbols carved on it match manuscripts I've found in archives across Europe." Despite his suspicions, Peter found himself drawn to Klaus's obvious expertise. "What kind of manuscripts?" "Records of Portuguese families who served as secret diplomatic couriers between the Iberian kingdoms," Klaus explained. "But some of these families maintained access to hidden knowledge, secret trade routes, coded communications about preserving important manuscripts and treasures. Your family name appears in several of these documents." Peter stared at the German historian. "That's impossible. My family is Irish and Polish. We've been in Chicago for generations. Klaus nodded knowingly. That's what they wanted you to believe. But the Matthews name is an anglicization. The original family name was Mateus, a Portuguese family of navigators and merchants who became secret guardians of Iberian treasures during the Age of Exploration, maintaining certain responsibilities. The revelation hit Peter like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about his identity was shifting beneath his feet. His grandfather, the quiet bookkeeper from Chicago, had been carrying the weight of 5 centuries of hidden history. What kind of responsibilities? Peter asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Klaus opened his leather satchel and withdrew several photocopied documents covered in medieval script. The Matthew family were guardians. They protected certain artifacts, certain knowledge that the Spanish crown wanted to destroy along with the Jewish and Muslim communities. Peter examined the documents, recognizing some of the symbols from the wooden box and the chest. Protected them how? By hiding them, by creating elaborate networks of safe houses and secret routes, by ensuring that important manuscripts, navigation charts, and cultural treasures could be moved safely between Portugal and Spain during times of political conflict and emerge when the time was right. Klaus pointed to one of the documents. This mentions a network that extended from Porto to Granada, with connections to the Alhambra itself. The Mateus family weren't just merchants. They were cultural treasure guardians, protecting valuable artifacts and knowledge from both Portuguese and Spanish heritage. The pieces were beginning to form a picture that both thrilled and terrified Peter. His family's mysterious profession, the secretive nature of his grandfather's work, even his own skills at information gathering, it all made sense in the context of a hereditary responsibility to protect hidden knowledge. But why me? Peter asked. Why now? I've spent the last few years selling corporate secrets, not protecting cultural treasures. Klaus studied Peter's face carefully before answering. Perhaps because the time has finally come to reveal what your family has been guarding. Perhaps because the world is ready for certain truths. He gestured toward the locked chest. That chest contains clues to the final hiding place. But it can only be opened with specific knowledge that has been passed down through your family line. Peter thought about the photographs, the map, the mysterious woman who seemed to move through time itself. What if I don't have that knowledge? Then we'll have to find another way, Klaus replied with a grin. Because according to my research, what's hidden in Granada is worth more than money or gold. It's knowledge that could change our understanding of medieval Spain, of the interaction between cultures, of how civilizations really develop and preserve themselves. Peter looked around the dusty room with new understanding. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a shrine to his family's secret history, a way station in a network of hidden knowledge that stretched across centuries and countries. All right, Peter said finally. If we're going to do this, we do it together. But I want to know everything you know about my family. Klaus nodded enthusiastically. Agreed. But we should work quickly. The academic world isn't the only community interested in what the Matthew family has been guarding. There are others, collectors, governments, organizations, who would prefer these secrets remain buried permanently. As if summoned by Klaus's words, Peter's phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had been contacting him since Madrid. Toledo is watching you, Peter Matthews. Choose your companions carefully. Peter showed the message to Klaus, who read it with growing concern. It seems our research has attracted attention, Klaus observed. We should examine that chest quickly and then consider our next moves very carefully. Klaus produced a small toolkit from his satchel, the type used by manuscript conservators and archaeologists. University training, he explained in response to Peter's questioning look. When you work with medieval documents, you learn to be prepared for any kind of lock or binding mechanism. While Klaus examined the chest's locking mechanism, Peter explored the upper floors of the abandoned house. The second floor contained 3 small rooms, each empty except for more carved inscriptions and symbols that seemed to form a continuous narrative across the walls. In the largest room, Peter discovered something that made his pulse race. A section of the wooden floor that appeared newer than the rest, as if it had been replaced or repaired. When he knelt to examine it more closely, he could see that several floorboards were actually removable, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. "Klaus," Peter called. "You need to see this." The German historian climbed the narrow stairs, leaving the chest temporarily abandoned. When Peter showed him the hidden floor compartment, Klaus's eyes lit up with scholarly excitement. "This is incredible," Klaus whispered. "A hidden archive, probably untouched for decades or even centuries." Together, they carefully removed the loose floorboards to reveal a rectangular cavity lined with oiled leather. Inside were several wrapped bundles, manuscripts, documents, and what appeared to be maps drawn on parchment. Peter lifted out the first bundle with trembling hands. The parchment was covered in text written in multiple languages: Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and medieval Spanish. Klaus examined it with the reverence of someone handling a priceless artifact. "This is extraordinary," Klaus breathed. "These are merchant documents, papers created to help Portuguese trading families move freely between Spain and Portugal while secretly transporting and hiding valuable manuscripts and cultural treasures." The second bundle contained detailed maps of southern Spain, with particular focus on Granada and the Alhambra Palace complex. But these weren't tourist maps. They showed secret passages, hidden rooms, and underground chambers that didn't appear in any official architectural plans. Your family wasn't just preserving documents, Klaus realized. They were maintaining detailed intelligence about one of the most important palace complexes in medieval Europe. The third bundle contained something that stopped both men cold: a detailed genealogical chart showing the Mateus family lineage from 1492 to the present day. Peter's name appeared at the bottom, along with a notation in faded ink: "Final Guardian, Granada awakens 2024. 2024, Peter repeated. "That's this year." Klaus nodded grimly. "It seems your arrival in Spain wasn't as spontaneous as you thought. Someone has been planning this for a very long time." The fourth and final bundle contained a detailed floor plan of specific sections of the Alhambra, with notations indicating the location of a hidden chamber containing what was described as the Archive of Iberian Treasures, collected artifacts and knowledge from Portuguese and Spanish maritime expeditions. "If this is real," Klaus whispered, "it would be the archaeological discovery of the century, possibly the millennium." Peter studied the documents with growing unease. "And my family has been guarding the secret of its location for over 500 years. Guarding it and waiting," Klaus corrected. "Waiting for the right time, the right person, the right circumstances to reveal it safely." As they carefully rewrapped the precious documents, Peter's phone buzzed again. This time the message was longer. "The chamber beneath the Alhambra contains more than documents. Some knowledge is dangerous. Some secrets were hidden to protect the world, not just to preserve history. Consider carefully before you proceed." Klaus read the message over Peter's shoulder. "Someone really doesn't want you to continue this investigation. Or," Peter replied thoughtfully, "someone wants to make sure I understand the responsibility I'm accepting." They spent the next hour creating detailed photographs of all the documents before carefully replacing them in their hiding place beneath the floor. The chest downstairs remained locked, but now they had a destination and a purpose. "Granada," Klaus said as they prepared to leave the house. "When do we go?" Peter looked around the dusty room that had revealed so many family secrets. "Tomorrow. But Klaus, if we're going to do this together, I need to know I can trust you completely. Because I'm beginning to think we're not just chasing historical artifacts. We're walking into something much more dangerous." Klaus met Peter's gaze steadily. "You can trust me, Peter, but you're right to be cautious. Some secrets have powerful guardians, and not all of them are friendly." As they locked the house and walked back through Toledo's narrow streets toward the train station, both men felt the weight of centuries pressing down on them. The ancient walls seemed to whisper warnings and encouragements in equal measure, as if the city itself was uncertain whether revealing its deepest secrets would bring salvation or destruction. The train journey back to Madrid gave Peter and Klaus time to process what they had discovered and plan their next moves. Klaus proved to be an invaluable resource, explaining the historical context of each document and helping Peter understand the magnitude of what his family had been protecting. The Archive of Iberian Treasures, Klaus explained, would contain artifacts and knowledge from the greatest period of Portuguese and Spanish exploration, navigation charts, trade records, cultural treasures, scientific discoveries, all preserved from the Age of Discovery. Peter watched the countryside roll past the train windows. And it's all been sitting hidden in the Alhambra for 5 centuries? Not just sitting, Klaus corrected. Being protected. Your family and others like them have been maintaining it, ensuring its survival through wars, conquests, political upheavals, and religious persecution. But Peter was troubled by more than just the historical significance of their discovery. Klaus, how did you really find me? The coincidence of you being in Toledo at exactly the right time. Klaus was quiet for a long moment before answering. I haven't been entirely truthful about that, he admitted. My research into the Mathieu family began 3 years ago when I found references in German archives, documents stolen by the Nazis during World War II that mentioned the Granada archive. The revelation sent a chill through Peter. The Nazis knew about this? They knew something was hidden in Spain, but they never found it. My grandfather was actually involved in some of those searches. After the war, he spent decades trying to locate and protect artifacts that the Nazis had sought to destroy or steal. Klaus pulled out his phone and showed Peter a black and white photograph of a man in 1940s clothing standing in front of the Alhambra. That's my grandfather, and that's your grandfather standing beside him. Peter stared at the photograph in shock. The two men stood together like old friends, both carrying the same serious expression he had seen in the photos from Toledo. Our families have been connected all along, Klaus continued. My grandfather left instructions that if a member of the Matthews family ever came to Europe seeking answers about their heritage, I should help them. The pieces of an incredibly complex puzzle were falling into place, but Peter still couldn't see the complete picture. So you've been waiting for me? Waiting and watching, Klaus confirmed. There are others who know about the archive, Peter. Not everyone who seeks it has pure intentions. My family has been helping to protect the secret, just as yours has been guarding it. As their train pulled into Madrid's Atocha station, Peter felt the weight of centuries of family responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just Peter Matthews, the former information broker trying to escape his Chicago past. He was the final inheritor of a legacy that stretched back to the Reconquista, the last in a line of guardians protecting one of history's greatest hidden treasures. We'll need to be very careful in Granada, Klaus warned as they gathered their belongings. The Alhambra is heavily monitored, full of tourists and security cameras. Finding and accessing a hidden chamber will require precise planning. Peter nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. His years in corporate espionage had taught him how to move through secure facilities undetected, how to access restricted areas without triggering alarms. But this would be different, this would be personal. That evening, as Peter packed for Granada in his Malasana apartment, he found another message waiting for him. This time it wasn't a text or a phone call, but a handwritten note slipped under his door. Peter, the archive contains the accumulated wisdom of 3 civilizations. It also contains warnings about forces that seek to use such knowledge for destruction rather than enlightenment. The woman you seek will be in Granada, but so will others. Trust Klaus Weber, but trust your instincts more. Some guardians protect by revealing, others protect by concealing. Choose wisely. A friend. Peter showed the note to Klaus when the German historian arrived to finalize their travel plans. Klaus read it with growing concern. This confirms what I suspected, Klaus said grimly. We're not the only ones heading to Granada. The question is whether the others are allies or enemies. As they booked their tickets for the next day's journey to Andalusia, both men were acutely aware that they were crossing a threshold. Tomorrow they would travel from the medieval heart of Spain to its Moorish jewel, carrying with them the hopes and fears of generations of guardians who had kept an extraordinary secret alive through centuries of upheaval. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey into Peter's ancestral past. The mystery keeps deepening, doesn't it? Klaus seems trustworthy, but can Peter really believe that their meeting was just an amazing coincidence? The documents hidden in Toledo have revealed that Peter's family legacy stretches back over 500 years. And now he's heading to Granada, where the greatest treasure of medieval Spain awaits discovery. But they're not alone in their quest. Mysterious messages warn of others who seek the archive for their own purposes. What do you think Peter and Klaus will find beneath the Alhambra? Will the mysterious woman finally reveal herself in Granada? And who else might be hunting for the same ancient secrets? Share your theories in the comments below. Don't miss the next episode, Secrets Beneath the Alhambra in Granada, where Peter and Klaus will explore one of the world's most beautiful palaces and attempt to unlock mysteries that have been hidden for centuries. The greatest adventure and the greatest danger of Peter's journey is about to begin. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of this incredible saga. The ancient walls of Toledo have whispered their secrets, but the magnificent Alhambra is about to reveal treasures beyond imagination.